I work as a coordinator of cemetery operations, or I can simply be referred to as a cemetery manager. One of my responsibilities is to sit down with visitors and relatives of the deceased to arrange and assist with funerals, the land sales, etc. An individual in his 30s named Antonio. I once had a highly spiritual man sit down with me to buy his ailing father a plot, who was receiving hospice care. Antonio, a Hispanic individual, had a very strong accent, and I could see in his eyes that he was a really kind man who showed me images of his father, who appears to like a charming man who is far too young to be apart from his family. But regrettably, the man's moment arrived. Antonio made arrangements that same week for the funeral service for his father at the. It was an extremely stormy day at the cemetery. The funeral day, which is said to represent good fortune. The funeral procession came to a halt before. Regarding the front office structure for a moment, I went outdoors beneath the front awning of the structure and noticed Antonio in the. We each waved at the automobile behind the hearse. Because of the weather, I returned inside. Until the parade was prepared to head to the graveyard. I boarded a graveyard pickup truck. Trucks and trailed the parade to the last location where I would stand together. My umbrella oversight as a component of my ensuring that funeral services are conducted fluidly. Following the burial, I took a few laps the location within the truck to conduct a survey. The region as I completed at least several times throughout the day. I needed to take care of a lot of paperwork. Additionally, I had to close the graveyard that evening, so a little while later I returned to my desk and dealt with this. At 5:30, the cemetery closes, so as soon as night fell, I took a drive about the location once more to make sure everything. After guests had departed, they drove to close it. The front gate was a comparatively mild days in early March were still somewhat short, so on a typical day, closure time would. Darkness is already falling, yet on this. It already felt like a stormy day. It was night time. I was returning to my workplace via car when I thought I spotted someone walking quickly down one of the tombstone pathways, prior to disappearing behind a hedge, and as I vanished from view, I beeped my trumpet to inform them of the location. Was shut down, but oddly, I didn't see them once more. After grabbing my umbrella, I dashed outside into. I turned as the rain continued in that direction. He turned to see beyond the hedge. Down this lengthy line of grave markers on one. Hedges on the opposite side. I looked about, but I couldn't find anyone. The rain for 20 minutes straight, but eventually, I had to give up. I returned to the office by car and looked over the CCTV footage, but none of it detected any odd movement. Although it was a little more difficult to see. Largely due to the storm, and it was. Moreover, it is now completely dark outside. I made an effort to multitask while monitoring the camera as I completed some of my documents as soon as I heard the front door to the visiting room closed abruptly. I leaped out of my seat and shouted, "Hi there." Initially, I believed it to be the same individual I previously saw. Perhaps they received imprisoned in the graveyard and were seeking help departing. I went outside. There was nobody in the lobby. I glanced around and said hello once more. Perhaps they were the ones that slammed the door. Departing. I began examining every window. And I halted when I noticed one of them. Someone looking back from the opposite side. At me, expressionless, I leaped They didn't flinch when they screamed back. I took a step forward and squinted my eyes. Perplexed expression when I recognized that. Identified this elderly-looking Hispanic man. In my mind, it was reminiscent of the. He displayed images of Antonio's father. I ran out of breath with my throat and my heart. The building's front door and two. I noticed the man on that side, but he wasn't scheduling it into the fields. He wasn't concealing himself under a neighboring bush. He had left. And surveyed my surroundings while standing in the saturated by the rain and fled back inside. Locked up my belongings, packed them up, and obtained my vehicle. I opened and shut the gate again. I drove home after locking it behind me while at home, my wife questioned me about why I was acting so silent that I simply told her it was a hard day. Work today, I believe I was overworking myself, and my thoughts were misleading me, but it is quite unsettling to consider. By Jeremy. This was in the dead. My name is Jeremy. October is cold and windy where I live. This small community is quite old and impoverished. Buildings from the early 18th century that. One evening, a friend and I were bored and I am aware that I chose to go, about at 3 a.m. When leaving an impoverished town at 3 in the morning. Isn't really intelligent, but we enjoy having our enjoyment. We grew tired of roaring about in our cars. Both of us are huge metal fans. Heads, and we subsequently had our own band, hence we determined that it would be fascinating and awesome to stroll around a town cemetery. Located behind the old town square is a enormous cemetery that is separated by two sides of a road, each side occupying around 20 acres of land as I mentioned earlier. Enormous. We chose to examine the oldest section. This area of the cemetery is entirely cut off from the remainder of the more recent. A cemetery with a gate and an ancient iron fence. We start to move around and make sure. Trying to read the antique gravestones outside the graveyard. Grass-covered graves capturing images. I realize I'm being a little disrespectful. However, these were graves from a minimum of. There was no one alive a century ago. That would find it upsetting, and I'm certain. Those buried there also didn't mind. A lot. After looking at it for approximately an hour. We take a seat beside a massive pecan tree. At the center of the historic cemetery, which is. When this young girl's laughter is heard. I mean, it was quite near to us. I initially thought it might be a toy. Buried with a child or anything. That I'm not easily frightened, so. I simply assumed that it was motion activated or. That's something we're not at all. We both kind of giggle because it's easy to frighten. Stating that it's eerie and simply. Continue conversing and taking in the atmosphere. Afterward, as with all tales like these, I get. The sensation of something or someone. Observing me once more, I reasoned. That I was allowing everything to get. Entered my mind, after which my friend claims that he. Believes he spots a figure in the shadows of. A little woodland area adjacent to the. Graveyard that we were very close to. Currently, we're both a little. Feeling uneasy, I decide to get up and. Depart. And that sound is the same sound. When we hear leaves, it is played again. Crushing beneath a person's feet. When we made the reservation, we went down the hill that leads to the historic area of the cemetery where I parked my car. Never in my life have I run that quickly. That sound of laughter seemed to be pursuing us at that moment. We both sort of just jumped right in. At that time, it was either fight or flight mode. As quickly as we could without stopping to think. As we approached, the The sounds behind us ceased. I turned on my vehicle and plugged it in. As you move out onto the highway. Fortunately, nobody struck us without looking. We traveled to the Seoul gas station. Station that is operational throughout this period of. To check the back of my automobile at night, we had been talking about how we were. We were afraid that some __ had been done to it. Go around to look and quickly locate. The rear doors open. I'm positive that neither of us ever opened it. We had no justification to. I open it and examine the rear seats. Verify that nothing is there and immediately return the vehicle and remove it. I still don't understand what transpired. I don't know if we both did that night. Reacted excessively, or all I know is that I still had the strange sensation that every time I tell you, something is behind you. This narrative. Written by Eric Wainwright. At the age of 19. Sean, a buddy of mine who was a large idiot, stopped over to relax an hour. Like he frequently did in the basement during the summertime. I recall that he had a bottle of Coke in his. I was eating Wendy's when he held my hand. Suggested that we look into that eerie, small cemetery on the other side of town. It was the most improbable notion imaginable, and I even informed him that the following day, we were still off from school, and I was certain of the cemetery where he was discussing. I'm not sure if it should even be called that. A typical cemetery, it's only a tiny acreage with perhaps 100 tombstones. The tombstones are, at most, rather antiquated. Searching, and whenever we went by there would be no indication that anyone had arrived to travel within the previous 10 years. The location most likely dates back hundreds of years. And there was something really eerie about it. Because a Gothic wall blocked it off. Metal barrier, and it was encircled by road on one side, woods on the other, and on the other side is an ancient, deserted structure. Everything about it was frightening. Feelings. It required some convincing, but Sean successfully persuaded me to check it out. Out as well. It was paradoxically a rather hazy reddish. I suppose it's a convenient day to add to the atmosphere. Sean parked his Honda alongside the. I instructed him to pull up further on the road. It was unclear that there was little traffic. Road, making it appear somewhat dubious. A few hundred feet down the road, he pulled up. Route, so we exited and went through the forests in order for any possible passing. We wouldn't be seen by traffic entering the tiny cemetery. It was simple to hop the fence in the woods. Perhaps the fence was 3 or 4 feet high. Sean sort basically spearheaded this because it was mostly his business. He guided us through the eerie backstory of land, and we examined the ancient grave markers. It appears that they are all from the 19th century, several of them had writing that was unreadable at that moment. I realize it sounds so cliché and stupid. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being continuously observed. I began scanning the area. The woods. I mentioned to Sean how unsettling this was. He answered. Still feeling like you're being watched. Next, I glanced at the deserted structure. To one of the windows overlooking the cemetery. I thought I spotted someone for a split second. Remaining at the window despite the dirt and a fog mark on the glass, but they walked or dodged nonchalantly away from the window. I informed Sean that we were being observed by. He turned to face someone in that building. To examine it as well, after which he proceeded to find the entrance. Don't, I told him, we should just get out of here before we get into trouble. I stood motionless near the gravestone where he was, observing as he strolled around the constructing. And he then managed to get in. I remained where I was when he summoned me over. And I heard a loud cracking sound. I turned my gaze there and glanced in that direction. This elderly man was most likely 55 years old. I was wearing a black raincoat with gray hair. Consider that he had jeans on and I have a mustache, but that's about it. Of him. Then he yelled, opening his mouth. He screamed to get out, not just shouted. He yelled it so loudly that I believed I saw birds that are alarmed take off. Then suddenly, I began to feel dizzy, and all of a sudden turned dark. I recall waking up as the next thing to being pulled into the forest. I became alarmed, believing I was being abducted. However, upon turning and rising, I saw that I was only Sean. Sean was frantic because of something he instructed me to rush back and accompany him to. I didn't ask any questions because of the automobile. While we were running through the forest, I heard something near my behind, and when I turned and saw that we were being pursued by someone, so I accelerated my pace. When we arrived at his Honda, he essentially put driving before the vehicle even had a opportunity to begin in full. Sean was inside that deserted. He discovered a sign of confusion in the building. The wood floor has been painted, which is essentially the indication of Satan. There were several strange dolls surrounding it, with eye button. Nothing else was visible to you in the structure since he had heard the old. A man outside screamed at me. He ran to discover me unconscious on the floor, and he gradually noticed the elderly man approaching me. He began to pull me away from the previous man, and he truly went into the woods. Genuinely lifted me up and flung me over the fence to free me. I returned to consciousness right away, and we ran at that point. In my entire life, I had only fainted once. And it was then. I'm not sure why I passed out, but it occurring at a cemetery with any sort of a satanic ceremonial structure adjacent to it makes it even odd. Unidentified. A few years ago, my grandfather died away. Was always close to him. On his birthday in July of last year, I gave him a trip to the cemetery for him. The graveyard where he and my grandmother decided to. It was around 1 hour's travel to be buried there. From my apartment. My family all went because they lived closer. I had to accompany him to his grave. Independently. It was a gloomy, dreary day and nothing is worse than going to a graveyard on a dismal day. The gatekeeper requested that I gave him the plot number, and he let me in. It's a sizable cemetery, and I would only visited there a few more times. But not as the driver, thus I had a difficult time to locate it. I saw very few, if any, other individuals at that day in the cemetery. The weather must have played a role alongside it. In the end, I located his stone and parked my automobile on the side of the lawn. I placed some flowers beneath a stone. I stood there looking for a long time. Shut and said a prayer. After saying my prayer, I opened my eyes and raised an elderly man standing around 5 rows of graves across the street from. He was staring directly at me. This man was someone I knew, yet it was my grandfather. No, it couldn't be. After I massaged my eyes, he vanished. Did I simply experience a spiritual moment? Where my eyes and mine are tricking each other? Me. In any case, I felt cold and had goosebumps. To be honest, I was terrified. I said, "I love you," and got back in my car. Grandpa and I drove away. I thought I was going to have a headache. Home, but I'm not sure why. The only vehicle on Prospect Road was mine. Peaceful road with a thick forest on both sides. There would typically be deer on the side. Going over here. As my automobile sped down the street, I noticed. Someone is approaching from the side of the road. Up, which was. Because there were no sidewalks nor a. This route has a walking path. Slowed down. Couldn't be. It appears to be my grandfather once more. My heart fell when I realized this. I swerved the vehicle after 1,000 feet. By accident. I made a valiant effort to take back control. And stop. Fortunately, my automobile avoided colliding with a tree. Instead simply skidded out in the midst of the roadway until it stops. I instantly turned to face what I had seen. I noticed a deer by the side of the road with him. Observing my vehicle. My heart was actually pounding. Fearful, things weren't going well, and I needed to return home. Certain there were no approaching automobiles and obtained. Back in my lane. I tried my best to keep my eyes on the road. Considering what I've just witnessed twice. For the remainder of the day, I felt strange, not ill, but there was a problem with my head. I watched an early show and then went to bed. My show's episode. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to. My phone is ringing. My heart's number was unknown. Began racing once more, and he named this. The news couldn't be good. I took the call and hung up the phone. To my ear. The other end was static. At last, I said hi. More stagnant. However, what I believed I heard next was. Couldn't accept. Just for a moment, perhaps a half second, I believed I could hear my grandfather's voice over the static. I made another attempt to say hi, but I was too shuddered. Actually, every single portion of my body was shaking. After that, the call ceased and was silent. The following day, I gave my phone provider a call. They were unable to track down the number. Lacked sufficient information to track it down. Apparently, although I'm not sure if that was simply __ or not. The activities that transpired that day and the scariest nights I've ever experienced. Knowledgeable. Do I believe my deceased grandfather was attempting to get in touch with me? I'm not sure, because that. It sounds absurd. You believe if you encounter something like this, you would be quite emotional. And happiness, but no, it still frightens me, and I. Truly yet unsure about what to believe or how to feel about it. Regardless of how absurd it seems, this occurred, and I question nearly every other. Was my grandfather indeed on the scene that night? Telephone. By 9 Rake. I was really foolish, along with my buddies, when we were in our teens. I was maybe 17 or 18 years old when this occurred. October was the month, and I desired to take a risky action in the spirit of Halloween. About 10 miles away is a little cemetery. Minutes away from my residence, and at the time I was. While intoxicated, I told a few companions that we ought to infiltrate it. I'll come up with some names for my pals. Mike and Ryan. Ryan didn't drink when we were at his house. Ever. Thus, when I had the notion that he was the person who took us to the graveyard, it was actually Mike and I that left. Ryan was merely a passenger in this. However, he hadn't been drinking. Ryan parked in a lot across from. It was a ghost town on the street because by then, it was almost midnight. We ensured that nobody was present to witness us We leaped the barrier to enter the graveyard. Although it wasn't quite a complete blackout, it was a little challenging to see more than 10 feet ahead of us, so everyone was utilizing our iPhone flashlights. It didn't seem like there was any darkness. Cemetery security, so we sort of separated from one another. Ryan appeared to be paying closer attention to Mike. I could still see, up close, where they were due to their flashlights. I ventured a bit farther by myself. And I made the decision to begin taking a weird video. Thus I began using the lights to record. Still going, of course. I captured a number of historic headstones on the cemetery's overall eerie atmosphere. At night. Since I no longer